Welcome friends. Now let us discuss a few amendments in your foreign trade policy, not major one, quite a few amendments in your foreign trade policy. The first one was as expected, your foreign trade policy 2015 to 2020, which was to end on 2020 was extended till 2021. Now the same foreign trade policy, which is foreign trade policy 2015-2020, now it is extended till 31st of March 2022. Mind you friends, this foreign trade policy 15 to 20 was about to end on 31st of March 2020. It got extended till 31st of March 2021. Now it is further extended till 31st of March 2022. So that is the first amendment which has been brought out in your foreign trade policy. Basically, 5 years foreign trade policy is now converted to a 7 years foreign trade policy as of now. Now the next amendment in your in relation to your foreign trade policy is when you talk about your advance authorization, or when you talk about your export promotion capital goods scheme. Advance authorization is for normal inputs and EPCG scheme is for capital goods, where you can import your inputs or capital goods without payment of duty, subject to fulfillment of certain export obligations. There was an exemption in relation to non-payment of your IGST and compensation cess. So when they import, obviously import duty will be there, and a part of the import duty will be IGST and compensation cess. On that there was an exemption which was till again, initially it was till 31st of March, then it kept on extending. Now that exemption is valid till 31st of March 2022. So if you see this particular point, extension of exemption notification, there are totally 3 aspects. One is advance authorization, where you are talking advance authorization for inputs. One is EPCG for capital goods, where when they are importing something, there was an exemption for IGST and compensation cess, which is now still is there till 31st of March 2022. Another point is all about your 100% export oriented units and its sister units, that is whether it is 100% EOU or electronic hardware technology park or software technology park or biotechnology park. When the goods are imported by them from DTA, which means from India to EOU or from India to EHTP, from within India to STP, from within India to BTP, there was an exemption on IGST and GST compensation cess portion, which still continues till 31st of March 2022. So when you are revising them, the first 2 points are separate and the third point is separate. Right, exemption on IGST and compensation cess in case of advance authorization and EPCG when the goods are imported. Here, first 2 points it is focusing on when the goods are imported against advance authorization or when the capital goods are imported against EPCG. Right, in that scenario, that exemption with respect to IGST and compensation cess portion of import duty, right, IGST portion and compensation cess portion of import duty is still 31st of March 2022. And when you talk about this last point, here it is talking about when the goods are imported by your electronic, EOU, that is 100% export oriented units, or electronic hardware technology park or STP or biotechnology park from DTA, then IGST and compensation cess portion is exempted till 31st of March 2022. Again, understand that here also it is all about import, it is not having much relevance to DTA. Even here the focus should be only on import by EOUs. Again, import by EOUs has got customs duty, and part of the customs duty is IGST and compensation cess. So moreover, it again remains the same. So don't think about DTA to EOU. Yes, that is another concept called as deemed exports from the point of view of DTA, but let us not enter inside it. Import by EOU, EHTP, STP, BTP, right, there will be customs duty and part of which will be IGST and compensation cess. That IGST and compensation cess portion is exemption is extended till 31st of March 2022. These are the basic extension of exemptions, right, 3 extension of exemptions on advance authorization, imports, EPCG imports and import by EOU, ESTP, STP and BTP. The exemption which was there on IGST and compensation cess portion of import duty is extended till March 2022, that is 31st of March 2022. Now friends, few changes were brought out on 10th of August 2021 with respect to your principles of restrictions and prohibitions. when you talk about your foreign trade policy, the goods can be categorized as prohibited goods, restricted goods, canalized goods and free goods. The focus is on the first two categories, that is prohibited goods and regulated goods. So, you are talking restricted goods, prohibited goods and restricted goods. So, your DGFT, Director General of Foreign Trade, what they did, they through a notification on 10th of August 2021, they brought out certain changes with respect to prohibition and restriction. These are general points, we will just walk through them and try to understand these points. Now, the restrictions and prohibitions with respect to what has been set off. Understand that DGFC has only given the principles of restrictions. Restrictions and prohibitions will keep carrying on as earlier, but the principles for giving restrictions and prohibitions have been revised. See, whenever the goods are categorized as prohibited goods or restricted goods, there are certain basic fundamental principles. Those principles have been revised. And why have they been revised? Because to meet the international agreements. So, the principles of restrictions and prohibitions have been revised. These we are going to talk, we are not going to discuss product based. We are going to discuss the basic fundamental principles based on which the import of goods or the export of goods is either prohibited or restricted. Now, these principles have been revised in accordance with your international agreements. Now, basically, what are the principles? Now, there will be restriction or prohibition on export of foodstuffs. Friends, here the restriction or prohibition is on only export part, not on the import part. Export of foodstuff or any other essential products. The reason is quite simple. When you are talking about foodstuff or any other essential products, there might be critical shortages within India. Therefore, Indian government has got all the rights to prohibit or restrict the export of foodstuffs or any essential products to make sure that there is no critical shortage within India. So, that is the first part, which is dealing only with export. In the next part is on import and export, necessary for application of standards or regulations. Now, there may be restrictions and prohibition on import and export for what purposes? For classification purposes, it can be there, for marketing, grading purposes or marketing purposes in international trade. Say for example, if you are importing, if you are exporting to Germany, right, they allow, in terms of international agreements, they will allow only particular grade of a material. Now, you can, as an Indian government, to meet the obligation of Germany, you can make sure that only that particular grade or that particular category, that particular quality goes to Germany, right. Those restrictions can be there with respect to a particular country also, it can be there, or a group of countries it can also be there. So, here the restriction of prohibition can be both on import as well as export. Rather, I'll take another example. Say for example, when plastic toys are imported from China, Indian government can tell that we will only allow a particular quality of plastic products to be imported from China. It should meet certain specific requirements. If it is meeting that requirement, we will allow the plastic imports, plastic toys imports from China to India. If it is not meeting that requirement, we will not allow. So, import and export for application of standards or regulations, it may be classification purposes, mainly the focus is on grading or marketing of those commodities in international trade. So, that is an example to understand this principle. The next principle which is there, friends, is all about, next is only about import. Import of fisheries product, whether imported in any form, to ensure that government measures to restrict production of domestic product or certain other purposes. So, when government is having certain restriction on certain fisheries products within India, import of the same product cannot be allowed, right. So, here the restriction is with respect to fisheries product in any form, right. Why the restriction or prohibition is there on import of fisheries product? The reason for the same is government may take measures to restrict the production of the same fisheries products within India domestic market, which means that within India. And if at all government tells that these fisheries products should not be produced beyond a particular quantity in India, it doesn't mean that you can go and import. So, government does not want that quantity of fisheries product beyond a particular limit. So, it will make sure that when there is a regulation or when there is a restriction on fisheries product, it should be both for domestic production as well as for the imported goods. Friends, if you look at it carefully, the first point focuses on export. The second point was focusing on import as well as export. The third point is focusing on import. The next point again is focusing on import. The next point focuses on import, and it tells that import to safeguard country's external financial position and to ensure level of reserves. Say for example, imports from USA have been huge, and dollar reserves are very limited. That being the case, Indian government can take a stand that okay, now import from USA should not cross beyond this particular reserve. If it is crossing, then if you have to pay, might be you have to pay a very higher import duty, or we will not allow you to import. So that is to ensure that our dependency on USA is not too much. Our reserves of dollars against imports from USA is sufficient. So that is to safeguard the country's external financial position and to ensure the level of reserves. So and again here the focus is only on import. The next point, again where the focus is only on import, restriction or prohibition on import to promote establishment of a particular industry. Say for example, Indian government wants to promote a particular textile sector, say for example, textile sector, right? It can tell that textile industry, we want to give sufficient support to textile sector of India, therefore we will allow import of textile products from outside India in a very limited quantity, or we will not allow at all. So that is to ensure that they are giving the boost, or they are giving that particular confidence to a particular sector, and this generally happens only in the initial period of that particular sector being introduced, right? So that happens in a scenario where a sector is facing a huge difficulties in terms of financial crisis, or even in terms of production capacity crisis, or in terms of a new product being manufactured in India. Government will tell that okay, let us only give some time to the domestic industry so that they can manufacture and they can have their supply within India. Till that point of time, we will allow imports only in a particular quantity or restricted quantity, or we may even totally prohibit it. So this is to promote establishment of a particular industry. We have taken this to an example of textile sector to understand this point. Again, the next point again focuses only on import. For preventing sudden increases in imports from causing serious injury to domestic producers, or to relieve the producers who have already suffered such injury. Which means that if say for example, all the toys industry is a classic example for this. Toys are imported in huge quantity from China, kids toys. Now they may put some restriction for import of toys from China to ensure that domestic industry is not having any serious injury, or it might be a case where the domestic industry has already suffered an injury, to make sure that that domestic industry which has already suffered an injury, to relieve those producers, which means that to make sure that they again coming back to their normal health, either to prevent deterioration of health, or if the health is already deteriorated, to make sure that again the health is coming back to normal. So this happens in a situation where our dependency on a particular product from a particular country is too much. So this kind of restrictions are imposed on, restriction or prohibitions are imposed on the imports. Next point is both for import as well as export. So this next point with in relation to prohibition or restriction is both for import and export, for protection of public morals or to maintain public order, right? So if at all the government intends to protect the public morals or to maintain public order, say for example, import from China or import from Pakistan or export to Pakistan is not at all having any kind of lucrative business for the government. Moreover, it is causing problems with the public. Public are not interested in having any kind of relationship with Pakistan for some small time. I mean, there is tensions between India and Pakistan has gone to its new heights. Therefore, government thinks that if now we allow import and exports from Pakistan, it might be a problem for public morals, and public order might also be disturbed. Therefore, what they will do, for some time, they will stop having any kind of imports and exports from Pakistan. That is to ensure public morals and in order to maintain public order. Next point is also for both for import and export. It is self-explanatory, for protection of human, animal, plant life or health. Alright friends, you can remember the movie Singham, where you're talking about all the waste and scrap being imported in India. Obviously, when waste and scrap, see, dumping of waste and scrap is a major problem throughout the world. That being the case, one of the country might want its all the waste and scrap to be dumped in India, and even waste and scrap can be brought to India and they can be kept at a place, and for that the opposite person will give us an amount. Normally, if I am importing something, I have to pay to the exporter of that country. But reverse might happen. I'll import dump, waste and scrap and I'll get payment. Now, government is telling that no, you cannot do that. We can have prohibitions and restrictions in relation to those import and export of those goods. Basically, here import is a major focus because it is going to have regressive effect on human, animal, plant, life or health. So, those kind of restrictions and impositions, restrictions or prohibitions can also be there. Next point again is relating to both import and export. Again, the focus is on gold, silver. Importation, exportation of gold, silver, government can have control because when you talk about gold and silver, always understand that government have got a lot of checks and controls on gold and silver right from the beginning to make sure that black money does not increases tremendously. Next, we are talking about a scenario where prohibitions or restrictions are imposed necessary to secure compliance with laws and regulations, including those laws where we are talking about protection of patents, trademarks, copyrights and prevention of deceptive practices. Now, obviously, when you talk about certain items, here again it is about both import and export. Right, supposing there is a item on which I am having a patent and I do not like that item to be exported outside India till the time that it is satisfying the need of the domestic industry, right? So, that is required. Or let us take another scenario where there is a product for which I am the person who has taken the patent, I have created that product and the same product is replicated by someone else and he is trying to import in India. Now, I will have genuine problems because it is against my laws of patents which protects me from my patents. So, when Vishal Jain as an individual is having patent on particular product or a copyright or a trademark, then the same item, if it is replicated by someone else, say from China or USA, and again the goods are coming to India, it is affecting my patent right. So, government can have certain prohibition or restriction in relation to both import and export. Next point again is self-explanatory, again both for import and export, relating to products of present labor, both relating to your import and export. Next is for protecting national treasures of artistic, historical and archaeological value. A very important point when you talk about your say idols, I mean God's idols, it is a known fact that they have been taken from India and they have been smuggled outside India. Right. So, when you talk about all those items of archaeological value, huge value, it's not only crores, mere crores, it will be hundreds of crores value. Government can have restrictions or prohibition with respect to import and export of those items which are having artistic value or historic value or archaeological value. You can always remember for this point the example of God's idol, where people have been doing this for a long time, that they go to a temple, they take the main idol and they smuggle it, right. So, there government can have government can tell that the idols belonging to Indian temples cannot be exported. And government can even vice versa tell that idols belonging to some other country's god or some other country's important person need not be imported. So, government can do vice versa, both for import and export. Next, for conservation of exhaustible natural resources, again self-explanatory. If there are natural resources which are very short in India, obviously government will not like those items to be exported. Again, though the point is both for prohibition, restriction on import and export, the focus is much on export. Government will tell that we have shortage of certain natural resources within India, why should we allow to export that natural resources? Next point, it is talking about a prohibition or restriction for ensuring essential quantities for the domestic processing industry. Now, understand that processing industry will require certain raw materials. If those raw materials are exported too much, that domestic industry will not have sufficient raw materials. For that purposes, there can be restriction or prohibition. Again, it pertains both to import and export, but basically here the focus is much on export, because of those raw materials which are used for domestic processing industry are exported much. There will be shortage of supply here. Supposing if say for example India is a hub of electronic products, if semiconductor chips are having are short in India, then further manufacturing will not be done, right. So, for that purposes government can that these semiconductor chips which are required for domestic electronic industry need not be exported much. So, those kind of restrictions or imposition can be there. Next is restriction or imposition, restriction or prohibition essential to the acquisition or distribution of products in general or local short supply. Again the same, if at all there is a local short supply, government can always tell that we are not interested in export of that particular product. Though it pertains both to import and export, the focus is much on export side. Now the next point is all about government security purpose interest for protection of country's essential security interest relating to fissionable materials. What is this fissionable materials? We are talking about all the biowars or nuclear weapons, nuclear items, nuclear weapon items. So government can tell that no, if at all there are certain nuclear weapons or bio weapons created in India, we will not allow it to export. Or if at all there is bio weapons or nuclear weapons created outside India, we will not allow it to import. Both, it can be both on import and export. So this fissionable material refers to your bio weapons or nuclear weapons, or not only directly to bio weapons or nuclear weapons, or the raw materials used for making them, or relating to arms, ammunitions and implements of war, or taken in time of war or emergency in international relationship. Now the first 2 points specifically talks about arms, ammunitions, bio weapons, nuclear weapons. The third point focuses on any item, if at all at the time of war, if at all we are in process of war with a particular country, say China tomorrow. So government can tell that imports from China, exports to China is banned for security purposes for say 1 year or 2 years. That can always be there. Next, restriction of prohibition in pursuance of country's obligation under United Nations Charter for maintenance of international peace and security. Now this can be explained via, again, most of the points relate to both import and export. Initial few points were only focusing on certain import or export, but all the other points are focusing both on import and export. Now understand that, say for example, there is a problem with tension rising between Russia and Ukraine. India as of now has not taken any stand whether it will go to with Russia or Ukraine. Obviously India will go with that country which US is supporting, seeing the particular situation. So in that scenario, India might go with Ukraine. Now understand that United Nations chapter can decide that this country is creating a problem. Rather, we'll take a better example. North Korea is creating a problem. Right? It is not having any set of discipline with respect of in relation to international agreements. So United Nations Charter can tell that to make sure that North Korea is following the law and order which is created by international community, it can tell that we will stop having import and export to the North Korea. Now, read this point again. Restriction and imposition is there in pursuance of countries' obligations to United Nations Charter. India per se is not having any problem with North Korea. But to meet the obligation of United Nations Charter, in order to have international peace and security, India also should follow United Nations Charter's direction telling that okay, please have no import export with North Korea or limited import and export with North Korea. So that kind of restriction and impositions can also be there. All these restriction and prohibitions, these are only the principles. See, we have not discussed any restriction prohibition in specific. These are all the principles based on which government will have restrictions or prohibitions. All these set of principles have been revised. Why? Because international agreements have been revised, and as a consequence of that, these principles by which Indian government will decide prohibition or restrictions have been revised. Just a glance is sufficient. Obviously, this won't be asked as a direct question in exams, but nevertheless, you should know what are the principles based on which Indian government decides restriction or prohibitions of prohibition on import on export or import or export of particular commodities. These are all the revised set of principles.